The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was a quiet pressure in my chest, sudden and unfamiliar, like realizing too late that the room you're standing in was never meant for you. I remember adjusting my coat in the car window before going inside, smoothing my hair, practicing a small smile that felt hopeful instead of desperate. Family reunions were supposed to be safe. That's what I told myself. Even after years of distance, unanswered messages, and conversations that felt thinner each time, I still believed that blood had a memory stronger than resentment. I was 24, old enough to recognize tension, but still young enough to believe love would override it. The house glowed warmly from the outside. Yellow light spilled through the windows, and I could hear laughter drifting into the cold night air. For a moment I stood there listening, pretending the sound was reaching for me, pretending it meant welcome. When I stepped inside, the warmth disappeared. Conversations didn't stop, but they shifted, voices softened. Laughter turned cautious, like it had tripped over something unseen. My brother was near the table, surrounded by relatives, his shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. When his eyes met mine, something closed behind them. Not anger, not hatred, decision. My aunt noticed me next. Her smile appeared quickly, practiced and polite, but it never reached her eyes. She didn't step forward to hug me. She didn't even ask how I was. She simply nodded, as if acknowledging a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. I told myself I was imagining it. I always did. I moved through the room slowly, unsure where to stand, afraid that choosing the wrong chair would somehow confirm I didn't belong. No one offered me a plate. No one asked about my job, my apartment, my life. I floated between conversations like a ghost that could hear but not speak. Then my brother approached me. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't cruel. That made it worse. I laughed softly, the sound too sharp in my ears. "It's the reunion," I said. "Grandma invited me." Before he could respond, my aunt stepped closer. She placed herself between us, not aggressively, but deliberately. "We've already talked about this," she said. "This isn't the time." The words didn't make sense. I searched her face for clarification, for something solid to hold onto. "Talked about what?" I asked. She glanced at my brother. He looked away. "You don't need to be involved anymore," she continued. "Things are simpler when everyone knows their place." Their place. The room felt smaller, the noise louder. I suddenly became aware of how still everyone else was, how many people were listening without looking. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand answers, but something in their calm stopped me. This wasn't an argument. It was an ending they had rehearsed. My hands began to shake. That's when my grandmother reached for me. Her hand was warm and steady, surprisingly strong. She pulled me closer, her small frame firm against mine. The room faded behind her. She leaned in, her breath soft against my ear. "Let them think that," she whispered. They never found what I hid. Her words confused me, but her tone didn't. There was no fear in it, no regret. Only certainty. I looked at her, searching her eyes. She met my gaze calmly, as if anchoring me to something deeper than the moment. Behind us, my brother and aunt stood silent, watching, and in that silence I realized something painful and irreversible. I hadn't walked into a reunion. I had walked into a decision that had been made without me, and yet, for the first time that night, I didn't feel completely alone. They didn't ask me to leave. That's the part that stayed with me, the restraint, the carefulness, no raised voices, no dramatic accusations. Just a soft, collective withdrawal, as if they were slowly closing a door while maintaining eye contact, daring me to protest. I stood near the hallway for a long moment after my grandmother let go of my hand. Around me, the reunion resumed its rhythm. Plates were passed. Someone laughed too loudly. A chair scraped against the floor. Life continued with an almost impressive discipline. No one looked at me again. I waited for someone to change their mind, for my brother to turn around and say my name, for my aunt to sigh and admit she had spoken too harshly. I waited because hope, once wounded, doesn't disappear. It lingers embarrassed. Eventually, I understood that this wasn't confusion on their part. It was clarity. I slipped my coat back on quietly. The zipper sounded too loud in the room, though no one reacted. I moved slowly, not because I was weak, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of urgency. Pain doesn't need to rush. My brother passed by me near the door. For a second, I thought he might stop. He didn't. His shoulder brushed mine accidentally, or maybe not, and he kept walking. That was the moment something inside me detached. Not broke, detached. I stepped outside into the cold air, which felt honest compared to the warmth I had just left. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing, grounding myself in the sharpness of the night. I didn't cry. I was saving something, though I didn't yet know what. Inside, I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. The family I belonged to in name only. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without turning the key. My hands rested in my lap, trembling slightly, as if my body was catching up to what my mind refused to accept. I kept thinking of the word simpler. Simpler for whom? I replayed the conversation over and over, searching for the hidden accusation. Had I asked for too much, expected too much, or had my presence simply become inconvenient to plans I wasn't meant to see? When I went back inside to say good-bye to my grandmother, the house felt emptier even though nothing had changed. She stood near the hallway, waiting for me. "I'm going," I said softly. She nodded. No surprise, no apology. I hugged her, and this time she held me longer. Her arms tightened slightly, grounding, deliberate. When she pulled back, her hand slipped into my coat pocket, pressing something folded into my palm. "Not yet," she murmured when I looked down instinctively. Time matters. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted answers, but something in her eyes told me this wasn't the moment for either. I nodded. As I walked out, I didn't look back. That night, I packed my apartment slowly, not because I was leaving town, but because I needed to feel in control of something. I folded clothes with care. I lined my shoes neatly. I washed dishes that were already clean. Order is comforting when emotions refuse to be. My phone stayed silent. No message from my brother. No follow-up from my aunt. The absence spoke louder than any argument. In the quiet, I realized something unsettling. They hadn't pushed me away in anger. They had removed me in confidence. And somehow that hurt more, because it meant they had thought this through, and because it meant my silence, my years of patience, of understanding, had been mistaken for permission. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, the folded paper heavy in my pocket, my grandmother's whisper echoing in my mind. Let them think that. For the first time, I didn't know who them truly were. But I knew with painful clarity that whatever came next would change me. The silence that followed wasn't sudden. It crept in gently like fog, settling into every space I once expected sound. Days passed without messages, then weeks. At first, I checked my phone constantly, not because I expected apologies, but because part of me still believed confusion would turn into concern. It didn't. The quiet became consistent, intentional. I stopped reaching out. I learned quickly that silence can be louder than rejection. It forces you to listen, to yourself, to patterns you ignored, to truths that were easier to dismiss when voices were still speaking. I began to notice how often I had been the one to bridge gaps, the one to apologize first, even when I wasn't sure what I had done wrong. The one who stayed soft so others could remain sharp without consequence. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me tired. I focused on small, controllable things. I woke up early. I walked to work instead of driving. I learned which cafes felt calm instead of crowded. My life became quieter, but it also became clearer. My grandmother called once a week. She never asked about the reunion, never mentioned my brother or my aunt. She asked about my sleep, my meals, whether I was still watering the plant on my windowsill. Her restraint taught me something important. Care doesn't need explanations to be real. Sometimes she would pause before hanging up, as if weighing something. Then she would simply say, "You're doing well," and end the call. I began to understand that she was watching not just events, but me. One evening, after a long day, I finally unfolded the paper she had placed in my pocket. It wasn't a letter. It was a list of addresses, dates, names written in her careful handwriting. At the bottom, a single sentence, "Keep this safe." You'll know when. I didn't understand it, but I didn't feel anxious either. For the first time, I trusted that not knowing didn't mean being unprepared. Months passed. I moved into a smaller apartment filled with light. I stopped explaining myself to people who hadn't asked. I learned to sit with discomfort without rushing to soothe it. Strength, I discovered, wasn't loud. It was consistent. Occasionally, I saw family photos, online holidays, birthdays, moments that used to include me. The sting faded faster each time. Distance has a way of softening what once felt sharp. I realized I wasn't missing them as much as I was missing who I thought we were. Then one afternoon, my grandmother asked me to come over. Her house smelled the same. Tea and old books. She sat across from me at the table, her hands folded neatly. "You've changed," she said. I braced myself, unsure if that was praise or warning. "You're calmer," she continued. "You listen more than you speak now." I nodded. It felt true. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, property records, letters addressed to her unopened, dates that stretched back decades. "They assumed I forgot," she said quietly. "They assumed my silence meant agreement." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I waited because I wanted to see who you would become without knowing this. Understanding didn't crash into me. It unfolded. This wasn't about inheritance alone. It was about trust, about patience, about seeing who reveals themselves when they think no one is watching." I closed the folder gently. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. The silence had done its work. It had stripped away noise, expectation, dependency, and what remained was something I hadn't expected to find so intact. Myself whole, steady, and no longer afraid of being left out of rooms where I had never been truly welcome. The truth didn't arrive with noise. It never does when it's patient. It surfaced slowly, through paperwork and time, through conversations that didn't need raised voices to carry weight. My grandmother handled everything with the same calm precision she used when pouring tea. Steady hands, no spills. I stayed in the background, exactly where I wanted to be. There were legal steps, careful and respectful. No dramatic announcements. No sudden revelations at family gatherings. Just documents that spoke when people no longer could. At first, nothing changed. Then small things did. My aunt called, her voice careful, as if she were testing unfamiliar ground. She asked how I was doing, mentioned my name more than necessary, like it might slip away if she didn't repeat it. "I heard there were some misunderstandings," she said. I listened without interrupting. "I think we should talk," she added. "I'm doing well," I replied gently. "I don't think a conversation is necessary right now." She didn't argue. She simply went quiet. For the first time, she was the one sitting with unanswered words. My brother called weeks later. He sounded different, less certain, less protected by assumptions I didn't know. He said, "I thought everything had already been decided. I believe you," I told him. And I did, but belief didn't mean access. I didn't explain my choices. I didn't justify my boundaries. I let them stand on their own, unadorned and firm. My grandmother watched all of this quietly. One afternoon, as we sat by the window, she reached for my hand. "You didn't rush," she said. "That's how I knew you were ready." When she passed months later, it was peaceful. No tension, no unfinished business. At her service, I stood near the back, not out of shame, but out of choice. People noticed me then. Some nodded, some looked away. I felt neither. What she left me wasn't just material. It was clarity. I understood now that family isn't proven by shared blood, but by shared respect, that being included at the wrong cost is more damaging than being excluded with dignity. Life settled into something simple and honest. I kept my world small, but full, mornings with quiet coffee, work that challenged me, friendships built on mutual care instead of obligation. Occasionally, I'd think back to that night, the reunion, the whispered decision made without me, the younger version of myself, standing there shaking, waiting for someone else to define her place. I felt compassion for her now. She had been kind in a room that didn't value kindness. If I learned anything, it was this: silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. And self-respect doesn't need witnesses to be real. Some people lose access not because they were attacked, but because they failed to honor what they were given. As for what my grandmother hid for 40 years, it did exactly what it was meant to do. It revealed character. And in the end, what remained wasn't victory, it was peace.